Hey guys, Zomfox here, and today it's time to do a tier list video that I've been wanting to make for a while, and that is going to be a tier list of every single modern spring football game, playoff game. So naturally, this is going to be covering the modern USFL and then the XFL 3.0, just like my opening week tier list, except this is going to be all the playoff games, the division championships, and then the actual championships. So since we're doing this after the 2023 seasons, we have 9 total games to talk about. So without further ado, let's get started with the first game, and that being the 2022 North Championship USFL game between the Generals and the Stars. The Generals vs. Stars was a very solid game, all things considered. The game started out very simple looking, with the Stars getting a field goal in the opening drive, and in the first quarter ended with a couple other just punts between. But then eventually the Generals were able to make a really long drive, but an interception that had a long return by the Stars ended up kind of hurting them in the end, as the Stars were able to get a touchdown just a couple plays after that. And then at the end of the half ended up coming. It was 10-0, and it looked like the Stars had a really good shot to win this game. But then on their first drive at the third quarter, off the kickoff, they threw an interception, which allowed the Generals to get right back into it. The Generals go on to score a touchdown, and then the Stars and Generals both made some other miscues. Stars missed a field goal, fumbled the ball. But what really changed the game was in one of the Stars' punts in the fourth quarter, which the league MVP, Cavante Turpin, would end up returning for a touchdown. And after that, the Stars were able to get a field goal, but it was what happened right after that, as then the Generals ended up punting the ball. And just on cue, Maurice Alexander was able to return that for a touchdown, making two separate return touchdowns in the same game. The Generals threw an interception that ended up ending the game. Overall, this is a really solid game. It was definitely a great way to kick off the playoffs for spring football, considering the fact the AF and XFL 2.0 weren't able to make it that far. This game wasn't an S tier classic, but it was a really close game, as it was a true defensive battle as well as offensive having to make the most of their opportunities. The back and forth punt returns was incredible. All in all, this game was definitely an A tier game. This was a very solid game, and if this was your first experience to the playoffs for the USFL or XFL, you had a really great game to start with. Unbelievable experience. Great game, all things considered. As for the next game, it is the South Division Championship between the Stallions and the Breakers. And yeah, this one wasn't as good. It started off with the Stallions missing a field goal, Breakers got a touchdown, and then the Stallions basically from there on just were able to make it still a close game. They were able to get a touchdown back to back thanks to a pick six as well. But then the Breakers were able to get a touchdown nearly the end of the second quarter. But the Stallions were able to get a really quick touchdown, as they ended up having a kickoff return touchdown, making it 3 return touchdowns within the playoff weekend. Breakers threw an interception, and the Stallions led 21-14 at the half. And from there on, the game was basically over. The Breakers would make it look a bit close, but in the end, the Stallions just, in the second half, just completely dominated time possession. They were able to stop the Breakers after they had like a long 10-minute drive, and they only got a field goal out of it. Whereas the Stallions were able to do 7 minutes to get one as well. But all in all, the Stallions were able to win. In hindsight, I think this game got a lot more hate than it really deserved. It really wasn't as bad as I think I and a lot of other people remember it being. I think we all remember it as a blowout, but it really wasn't. But at the same time, it just wasn't a good game in the sense that even though the Stallions really didn't have that big a lead till the fourth quarter, if you watched it in person, you basically knew that the Stallions were the better team and were going to win it. And when they ended up winning it, it really wasn't a surprise, and it was just kind of boring experience, honestly. Because, like I said, even though technically, it was a close game for nearly the whole game, never really felt that way. And the way the Breakers played was kind of boring. All things considered, I think this was a D tier game. It was slightly below averages, even though a lot of the features about it, about how scoring it was, how close it was, make it seem like a good game. If you watched it, you know it really wasn't. And then finally, for the 2022 USFL season, you have the championship game between the Stallions and the Stars. I mean, what a game. The game was incredible. You had back and forth field goals to start the first quarter almost, and then the Stallions got a touchdown. Stars came right back. The Stallions came right back. Then at halftime, the Stars were down 20-9. But then the Stars would end up making a comeback, came 20-15, and then the Stars actually took a lead in the fourth quarter thanks to a missed field goal by the Stallions. And they led for a bit, but then the Stallions got a touchdown, and they ended up getting another one, and they ended up being in the lead thanks to that pick six. That was their second touchdown to be in the lead 33-23. But even then, the Stars still fought back. They got a touchdown, and then they nearly got another one. It was insane. I mean, it was an incredible one. the game was it was really insane. You had two huge injuries. Jamar Smith of the Stallions went down right at like halftime, and Alex Magoo to come back in to finish the game. And then near the end of the game, Case Cook broke his leg, and then KJ Costello came in, and he did okay, but his pick six is the reason why they ended up losing the game. But as for this one, I think it's very obvious where this game goes. This game was a certified hood classic, and across really all four leagues, the AAF, XFL 2.0, USFL Modern, and the XFL 3.0, this is a really good shot at being the best game of all those leagues. It was an incredible game, unbelievable, easy S tier, no debate. No one should have a problem with this because it just clearly was an unbelievable game. So that is the first S tier playoff game to go there. Now, as for the 2023 XFL season, it's time to look at those games. The first game was the South Championship game between the Arlington Renegades and the Houston Roughnecks. Yeah, this game wasn't great. So if you watched this game, you basically had to watch a quarter and a half and you knew who was going to win. Look, the Roughnecks just never stood a chance. They basically in the first quarter they were shut out. The Renegades were able to get a touchdown, and then when the second quarter hit, everything went bad. It started off with alternating touchdowns. Once the Renegades got their third touchdown of the game, then another field goal. You looked at the scoreboard and it was 23-8 at halftime, and that basically says all of it. Or not 28-3, it was 23-8. Once you saw that as the score, and then you realized in the second half there was only 6 points scored total, yeah, pretty clear the Renegades won. Look, in hindsight, I really don't understand why there was so much hype behind the Roughnecks. Even if you were a casual XFL fan, it was very obvious the Roughnecks really weren't that good a team. They were solid, but they were mainly boosted by the division they were in. Look, the Renegades didn't really get good till near the end of the season, whereas the Roughnecks were what they were the whole year. And the thing with the Roughnecks is that all their losses were in the games that mattered. They lost all 3 games in the regular season against the top 3 teams in the North, and then they lost their lone playoff game against the Renegades. The Roughnecks, they really weren't that great, and they showed in the playoffs. All in all, this game is definitely a D tier game. I would argue this is an F tier game. I just think it barely squeaks out of that category. This game was a complete waste of time if you watched it, because it was very obvious what was happening. The only redeeming fact was it showed just how good the Renegades have become, thanks to all their free agent signings, trades, and all that. As now that you had this team that had Luis Perez, Devion Smith on the same team, you realize, wow, this team is pretty good on that front. You still had Sal Cannella, unbelievable tight end. And then your defense, Donald Payne. I mean, you had some really big players, Shakur Brown. You realized pretty quickly you had a lot of really great players from the USFL and free agent and all that. And that's why this team was good. So, definitely a D tier game. Next, we have the Seattle Sea Dragons against the DC Defenders for the North Division Championship. Naturally, this game was mainly headlined by the fact that the Battlehawks missed the playoffs, yet the Renegades got in, which ended up, it really didn't matter. Back to the point. Yeah, the Sea Dragons, they got beat. But it was a more competitive game. I say more because really, just like the other one, this one wasn't actually that competitive. At the end of the first quarter, the Defenders were winning 9-0, but then the Dragons got back into the game thanks to scoring 6 in the second quarter. This made it a nice tie game at 9-9. But then when the third quarter happened, that's when the game basically became no point in watching it. The Defenders scored 2 touchdowns. The Dragons didn't do anything. And then, so now you're ending in going to the fourth quarter down 14. And then the Defenders scored another touchdown right to open up the quarter. So now they're up by 21, and then that was the game. The Dragons did end up getting a couple extra touchdowns near the end, but the Defenders also got one too. So basically the first half was great, and then the second half was pretty terrible. First half was great in competitiveness, but not great in gameplay. The second half was great in gameplay, but terrible in actual competitiveness. Basically, this is the definition of a C-tier game with extremes. You had 2 extremes in both quality of game and competitiveness for both sides. I think it's very obvious this game deserves to be a C tier. It really wasn't that good, but it wasn't bad by any means. C tier, it was an average game. And now finally for the XFL, we have the championship game between the Arlington Renegades and DC Defenders. This was definitely the best game of the bunch from the XFL, definitely. between them all. Though this still wasn't as good as the top two games from the USFL. It was still a very solid game, all things considered. The game wasn't really that close, mainly because the first quarter, the Renegades just got a lead that they really never lost. They scored 2 touchdowns, the defenders didn't. Yeah, 14-0 lead right at the beginning of the game, as well as the defenders throwing an interception to start the second quarter, which gave the Renegades a field goal. Doesn't help. So basically, as you can see, once the first half ended, you had a team winning by 14. And then even though the third quarter, both teams scored a decent amount, again, the defenders only netted 2 extra points. And then the fourth quarter, nothing really happened for them. And they couldn't get it done. It was technically a one-score game at the end, as 9 points in both USFL and XFL is a one-score game. But they never really got their chance to even go for it. So in the end, yeah, the defenders lost. So for this game, it was better than the other two. It wasn't as good as the top two games in the USFL. I think this is a B tier game. Like I said, it was competitive for, well, if you eliminate the first quarter, this was a really tight-knit, close, awesome game. But the first quarter just put such a hamper on the defenders, and the defenders were really never able to recover from it. Because just keeping up with a team that already has a lead doesn't do anything for you unless you can score more than them, which the defenders technically did, but not really. You know what I mean? They barely scored more than them in the second, third, and fourth quarters. Again, this was a solid game. I think this is definitely a B tier game. This was the best XFL playoff game. It's a great thing that the championship was the best game. Had a pretty solid atmosphere, even though it was rained. Because, yes, both title games had to deal with rain, which is insane. Or actually, my bad, I apologize. I remember the Defenders game against the Dragons. Yeah, that championship game at San Antonio was an incredible crowd, great atmosphere. Definitely helped the game in that sense. But, like I said, I think it's a B tier game. It just wasn't really competitive at all in terms of actual competitiveness. Just one team that you thought might get back into it, but they never did. Now it's time to do the most recent, and that is the 2023 USFL playoffs, starting with the Panthers versus Maulers. If you watch this game, you know where this is going. Why? Because this game was incredible. You start off with the first half is just a very low scoring, really not threatening whatsoever type of game. The first half ended up having the Maulers lead 10-3, but then the second half happened and everything just exploded. Big reminiscent of that Patriots-Panthers Super Bowl a decade and a half ago. As once the second half ended up opening up, oh man, the Panthers they had multiple long touchdowns, with the big one being their second TD of that quarter, which was a 72-yard bomb that E.J. Perry threw to Marcus Sims, which was just incredible. And then, really not even a bomb, just Marcus Sims was incredible at running. And then the fourth quarter happened. The Maulers got another touchdown to tie the game up, but then they ended up fumbling the ball when they had another drive by turning the ball over on downs. But the Panthers missed a field goal, which would end up haunting them in the end, as the Maulers did kick theirs. Then the Panthers got another long touchdown. The Maulers scored again with just a couple seconds left, thanks to an awful PI call that the Panthers did in the last drive. But then with just under 40 seconds left, the Panthers got in range to kick the game-tying field goal to send this to OT, making it the first modern spring football game to go to OT in the playoffs, where, much like when the Panthers lost to the Breakers in the regular season last year, they failed on both their attempts. The Maulers succeeded at both their attempts and ended up winning 31-27. Look, if you watch this game, you know where this is going, like I said. I literally did a poll showing what the three best USFL games, the modern USFL, and this one crushed both the opener and 22 between the Generals and Stallions and the championship last year. It easily won it. So it's no surprise this game is going right into S tier with the championship. This game was incredible and is probably the best modern spring football game to most people. I personally think that the championship last year between the Stallions and Stars was the best modern spring football game across both leagues. But like I said, I understand why everyone loved this game. Even though it sucked being a Panthers fan watching them blow the game, it was still great. And now we get to the yin to that yang. Why? Because we have the Breakers Stallions. I think another reason why I think people are going to look at the last year's as not as bad is because this one was horrid. End of the first quarter, Stallions are winning 9-7, thanks to having a field goal and then a touchdown, and then the Breakers having a touchdown. So it looks close, right? But then the second quarter happened. The Stallions get a field goal. The Stallions get a touchdown. The Stallions get another touchdown. What do the Breakers get? Literally nothing. Ends 26-7. Third quarter gets even worse. The Stallions score another 2 touchdowns to be up 40-7. That's the end of the third quarter is 40-7. The Breakers ended up scoring a bit, and the game ended 47-22. But, I mean, 40-7 is insane. To see this kind of a blowout, this kind of destruction of a team in the playoffs is insane. And, I mean, it's pretty obvious where this is going. This is going straight into F tier. This game was a total blowout. And even though you might say, oh, but it was fun, you had a lot of scoring. Nah. This game was so boring to watch because it was just a complete blowout. Once the first quarter was over, it was just horrid. And the first quarter wasn't good enough for me to say, oh, well, I think I can move it up to D tier. Nah. This game was so much worse than both the other games. Because at least in the Renegades Roughnecks game, the Roughnecks still technically could have come back with just a couple of drives. The Breakers would have needed a few. They would have needed a ton. So, I don't think it's a surprise. This game definitely deserves to be an F tier. And now the last game to talk about in this video until we have the playoffs from the XFL next year is the Maulers versus Stallions in the USFL Championship game. The game I was at, and I can tell you, it was a game of all time. Was it the best of all time? No. Was it the worst? No. Look, it was very simple. The Maulers' offense just was totally piss poor. This was definitely a very bad look for T-Will. He looked terrible in this game. He didn't throw the ball away. He didn't run really convincingly. The easiest way to put it is the fact that they ended up kicking and making 4 field goals as well as missing one. And that was basically all their scoring. It was all their scoring. They kicked 5 field goals and they only made 4 of them. There was a fumble that they got that they nearly returned for a touchdown but just barely missed out on it. The Stallions were able to score a few touchdowns. But the fact is this game was competitive for a while. Even in the fourth quarter, it wasn't until just a few minutes left where the Stallions made this game 28-12. The Maulers were legit just one drive for making this close. If the Maulers had made that field goal to start the fourth quarter, they would have only been down a few points. It would have been 15-21. That's literally a touchdown with no extra points. And then that means if their turnover on downs, the next drive didn't happen, they could have legitimately tied or even won this game. But like I said, it wasn't really a great game. It was solid, but basically a C-tier game again. This was definitely the weakest of the 3 championship games because it was kind of bland because it was every stereotype of the Maulers where they basically had to rely on their defense and special teams. And when their defense couldn't shut out a team to just under 20 points, you'll realize why they didn't win. And like I said in a lot of the other videos, you realize with that game that the Panthers were the reason the Maulers... Basically, the Panthers completely choked the game. They had a lot of bogus one-play touchdowns to make the scoring higher than it really should have been. And then they ended up losing the game because of the Panthers' PI, not because the Maulers scored a touchdown, if you know what I mean. Because of that, very obvious the Maulers really weren't as good as they should have been or needed to be to win this game, but it was competitive, C tier. So that'll do it for my tier list. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. The link for this tier list is in the description if you want to go make it and post it on Instagram. I am the same thing here, ZomFox USFL. So go follow me in that if you haven't already. As always, have a great night. Subscribe and hit the bell. We have videos coming out every couple of days or every few days during the off season. We have NFL content that's actually being dropped. Make sure to like this video. Have a great night.